Now, Hebrew imagery grabs that idea of hid in the cleft of the rock and it runs with it. One of the famous ones, that I won't make you turn there, but Song of Solomon is one of those. We always interpret Song of Solomon as a love letter between, well, it's Solomon and his bride. And we interpret it in the Christian tradition as a love letter between Christ and his church. And it's pretty sensual, pretty sexual. In fact, in the time of Christ, you couldn't read the song. If you were a Jew, you weren't allowed to read the Song of Solomon until you turned 30 because you weren't able to handle it. It's too risque, you know. And maybe it is, but the first time I heard that, I wasn't yet 30, and I immediately ran over and read the Song of Solomon. Someone said that in a sermon. I thought, well, I need to go see if, figure out what that's all about. The Song of Solomon 2:4 talks about the love between that man and that woman, and the beloved says to the man, hide me in the cleft of the rock. And it becomes this love poem in Hebrew literature, to be hid in the cleft of the rock. And what does that cleft mean? And what does that rock mean? Well, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, I want you to watch a reinterpretation. I say a reinterpretation. I don't know that we say this enough. We should say it more often. How things were perceived prior to the cross might be a little different than how they were perceived on the other side of Christ. The Apostle Paul helps us with this. The Apostle Paul, the great apostle of grace, begins to reimagine Old Testament stories in light of grace. One of the most famous one Paul uses is, remember in Galatians 4 where Paul says that Hagar is the old covenant from Sinai and Sarah is the new covenant from heavenly Jerusalem? Where'd he get that? Hagar is born hundreds of years before Sinai. So Paul takes an Old Testament story and puts a New Testament application to it, doesn't ask for anybody's permission. He just does it because he thinks it works. So Sarah is grace and Hagar is the law, and yet that's a complete anachronism of historical proportions. They're not the law and grace, but they are in that story. So I don't think when Israel's walking through the wilderness, they think anything of the rock that Moses walks over with a stick and hits. Remember when they're thirsty? And God says to Moses, take your staff and hit that stick and water comes out. And everybody takes their cup and puts it underneath the fountain of water and drinks it, and the water's tremendous. And I think they move on. It's not as if they all, put little images of rocks on their necklace and hang it around their neck. But Paul's reading through the Torah one day, and he's infatuated with Christ and the message of grace. And he sees Jesus with a spear in his side on the cross, and blood and water gushing out, and falling on a woman at the foot of the cross and transforming lives in ministry. And he's seeing streams break out in the desert called grace, and the move of the Holy Spirit and the finished work. And so Paul reimagines something. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 1 through 4. Moreover, brethren, I don't want you to be unaware. All of our fathers were under the cloud. All of them passed through the sea. All of them were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food. They all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. You hear that? Now there's not a soul when they took their cup and reached underneath that rock in the Old Testament and took a drink thought, that's Christ. That would have been totally foreign. But Paul's reimagining the rock in the wilderness because the rock was smitten and brought forth life. And Paul sees Jesus on the cross as smitten, having brought forth life. Jesus walks into the upper room, the room in which his disciples are hidden a week after his resurrection. And he sees Thomas, who we all call Doubting Thomas. And he says, Thomas, you don't believe it's me, do you? And Thomas a week before had said, unless I can put my hand in the nail scars of his hand and put my hand in the spear-pierced side, I won't believe that it's him. So Jesus appears and looks at Thomas and says, come here and put your hand here in the hole in my hand and right here in the hole in my side. Jesus the rock is wounded at Calvary, and faith springs forth from a doubting man when he takes a look at the cleft in Jesus' side and the cleft in Jesus' hand. And I think a message is sent to you in the New Testament. If you want to see the face of God, God's goodness, God's grace, God's mercy, God's trustworthiness, God's beauty, the only way that you're going to do it is to be hidden in the cleft of the rock, a man named Jesus, whom in John 14:6 Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, and no man comes to the Father but by me.